This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We are in the mobile studio. We will be at Consumer Electronics Show in January, so if you will be at CES, make sure you come out and stop by. The mobile studio will be parked out front of the Las Vegas Convention Center in front of Central Hall. If you or you know of somebody that's got an interesting innovation story that would make a great guest for us at CES, reach out, just drop us a note. You can send me an email at phil@killerinnovations.com, and we'll have the team reach out and see if we possibly can get you or them on the show. Today, we have a special guest. We are doing this as a remote. So actually, both of us are remote since I'm not in my studio in Colorado. I'm in the mobile studio, but our guest is also is not with me. He's in his offices in the East Coast. So we're doing this via Zoom, and we, again, thank Zoom for being a great and phenomenal supporter and sponsor of the show. The guest today is somebody that I've known. It's probably been more than a decade now that we've have worked on and off together on some crazy new ideas to see how they would play out and how they would work. Our guest today is Steve Helmuth, who's the EVP with the NBA, yes, the National Basketball Association. Steve historically had been on the IT side, but also driving the innovation efforts at the NBA. And now he's actually in a slightly different role where he's just focusing on taking a look and bringing new technologies, new innovations, new ways to enhance the fan experience for the NBA. So, Steve, thank you for taking the time and joining us here on the show today.
Phil, thank you so much for having me. It has been a great decade that we've been together. And since we last spoke, you're the man that brought a gigabit to the home. So
now I need your help in filling that gigabit now, right? So we got to go create what that next fan experience is.
We're going to talk about that today.
Yeah. So a little bit of background on Steve's and mine's experience of working together. When I was CTO at HP, HP and the NBA had a technology partnership, which then kind of threw Steve and I together to take a look at things that we had going on at HP Labs. And we did a lot of work in 3D. We actually did a bunch of experimental work in what we call double wide. So specialized cameras that captured side by side 16 by 9s or really effectively 32 by 9 viewing aspect ratios, because that turns out to be a pretty good aspect ratio for the entire width of the court. And we did a bunch of experiments. Man, I remember NBA All-Star games. Those were a lot of fun. The NBA knows how to throw a party. I have to say that much. But we did a lot of stuff and tested it out and showed it to people at the All-Star games to kind of see what the fan reaction. But it's a lot of fun. And the NBA's always had a great reputation for being willing to experiment. And I give kudos to you, and I give kudos to Adam and the leadership at the NBA for being willing to try new things.
Yes, from David now through certainly to Adam, we get lots of ramp to experiment, and we also get lots of ramp necessarily to fail too. Because when you experiment, sometimes that we always used to say you can always tell the television pioneers because they're the guys that are face down with the arrows in their back.
Yeah,
that used to be the case in broadcast, because in broadcast, you can never make a mistake, right? It always has to be perfect. When I started out in television, innovations were few and far between. But now that we have alternatives, now that we have streaming platforms, ESPN3, NBA League Pass, we have places to put streams where we just strictly try things out, and they can fail and they can be problematic, but we can lift the very good ideas kind of out of them. So in fact, Phil, I have a lab every summer in Las Vegas at the Summer League. We play over 80 games. I think we played 84 this year. And I pull up a mobile unit and I sit it between Warner Media, Turner, and ESPN, and I am free to innovate the entire summer league. So for 10 days, I'm doing alternative broadcasts, some of which I put on ESPN3, some of which I put on NBA TV, and some of which I just put strictly into League Pass. But it's a very, very fertile area for us to try out new ideas, and we've actually picked stuff up and used it.
Well, I mean, I think that's interesting because for you, for Summer League, then it really does become kind of your innovation sandbox, right? Because you can try things there. Plus, like any of the professional sports teams, whether it's NBA or you used to be at Major League Baseball or National Hockey League, you got a little bit of, got to get the owners behind something. You got to get the players to support it. So that sandbox experience I would guess, gives you an opportunity to kind of warm everybody up. They get to experience it and see what you're thinking versus, dropping it into a live game for one of the major teams.
Oh, perfectly put. I'll give you a really good example of that. So the NBA has been using the Skycam and the Spydercam, its cousin from Europe. They both pretty much operate the same way, with 4 pulleys operated by computers in the corners of the venue. And then like Mary Poppins, the camera flies around in between, depending on who's pulling and who's pushing, right? But obviously it's a hell of a lot more sophisticated than that. I did 4 seasons of data collection to see how high the ball went, to see if the ball ever went above 25 feet. And the past season, it only went above 25 feet 3 times when the clock was ticking. Obviously in the last 30 seconds of any quarter, the ball frequently goes above 25 feet because we have the half-court heaves. So I said to the basketball operations guys, we can fly this camera over the court reasonably because as long as the camera gets out of the way in the last 30 seconds of any period or any overtime period, we're safe. And here's the data to prove it. And then they said, okay, then show it to me. So then at the Summer League, I flew it at 25 feet, over the court. We're able to get a lot of really unique, cool angles, right, that we hadn't been able to before. The players got to look at it. The Players Association got to look at it. The coaches got to look at it. Everybody got to look at it. Now everybody's agreed that's where we're going to fly the camera. So you'll see on ESPN this year in particular, starting with the Christmas Day games, you'll see a really unique view of the NBA that you just haven't seen before. So that sandbox allowed me to do that.
Well, is that normally 25 feet, or is that lower than is that a lot lower than anybody else flies it, or?
I guess for our sport, it's the correct height, right?
Right.
Because in our sport, the ball can whip around and move any direction at any moment, right? In the NFL, they can kind of park it behind the quarterback. The way the cables run, the cables fan out, so they don't have to really worry so much about the cables. How many were to punt the ball backwards, or something crazy like that.
Right.
The cable get in the way. So for each sport, it's a little different. But for our sport, we had never actually flown the camera over the court during play for fear that it might interrupt the play or that it might distract the players. But it turns out the players, not surprisingly, focus completely on the ball. They don't see anything but the ball. I mean, they got blinders on to whatever else is going on around them. I mean, for God's sake, there are 18, 20,000 people screaming around them. So
right, and the fact is they're also getting paid the amount of money they get paid. So their job is to keep their eye on the ball.
Yeah, they're the kings of focus. They're professional focus artists. But the players actually said to me, following the use, and we tried it out at the All-Star game too. They said either A, they didn't notice it, or B, they thought it was really cool, and could I have some footage from it?
Well, and it's interesting because Peter Guber's been on the show, and Peter and I've been friends for a long time, and he gave me a quote of the book. For those of you who don't know who Peter is, he's part of the ownership group for the Golden State Warriors, arguably one of the better teams that are out there. And, Peter will tell you repeatedly about the NBA experience. It's, the players are important, but it is about entertainment, right? It's how do you tell the story? How do you really feed the fans for what it is they're interested in?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And, it's interesting, you and I recall back to some of the projects. We're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, I'd like to go back down through a little bit of memory lane, because some of the things that you and I talked about years ago, you've now deployed, which is just absolutely amazing. Like, player tracking and some of those things that are a lot harder to innovate and try and test than anybody ever thinks. And in some cases, people love to think about, I got this great idea and I want to have it live in 90 days, versus some of the stuff just takes a really, really long time to make it real. So we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Steve Helmuth from the NBA, and don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this quick, short commercial break. Welcome back. We are continuing our conversation with Steve Helmuth, EVP from the NBA, overseeing their technology and innovation. Steve, as we went to the commercial break, we were talking a little bit about yours and mine's long history down memory lane. And we did a lot of work on 3D, doing 3D captures live. Again, we did that at the All-Star Games. I remember the LA one in particular. Running between the court down to the movie theater, right? We did it at the movie theater down the street, I think, was where we actually...
Absolutely.
We had the glasses on, and people were down there watching the game in 3D. Now, we've kind of seen where 3D has gone. It still plays out well in movie theaters. It hasn't really caught on in a lot of other venues. It's part of innovation, part of experimentation. But where do you think that kind of fan experience, rather than a traditional flat video experience, where do you think that's going to go in the future? What's the experience in a living room going to be like?
First of all, Phil, I'd like to say I greatly appreciated all the participation that you did in our efforts. And 3D was really an effort to bring fans closer to courtside, because once you want, and in a movie theater, 3D worked. With a large picture, because what a large screen allows you to do is to do convergence, right? So I can look at an aspect of what's on a large screen, right? And I can understand, I can converge on it, and then my brain makes sense because that aspect comes into sharp focus, right? So the guy that we did this with, Vince Pace, who was connected with James Cameron,
yep.
If you go back and watch Avatar, what you'll see is that in every frame of Avatar, James Cameron is telling you what to converge on.
Right.
He actually blurs much of the picture around it, which is why it worked as a 3D picture, because as a 3D motion picture, because it was so easy for your brain, because you're converging on one thing in every picture, right? So when we did our 3D experiments, when we did the big screen, we did a 50-foot screen. People would sit close to it and go, this is better than the game. But when it got to the small screen and convergence didn't work,
right,
it fell apart, right?
Yep.
So similar to that in VR, you converge on something in VR and it doesn't sharpen in focus. And what you need, what your brain desires, is that sharpness and clarity. It's not there. It remains fuzzy. And then you get a headache and you say, I've had enough. So VR has been problematic, in its use. It will get better. The next surge of VR will have eye tracking, so that it will absolutely know what you're looking at. And I'm sure there are people sitting in laboratories, working on this right now to make this work. So
is your interest then in that being able to, stream a game in some VR format so that somebody could have the goggles and feel like, whether they bought League Pass or whatever, but they feel like they got the seat courtside, it's foot on the hardwood?
I think my interest now, I'm veering more toward the idea that you can, that the living room of the future is going to be 4 walls of video. And that you can sit in the living room in the future with all this bandwidth, and you can say, on that front screen, I want the Golden State Warriors, on these screens next to me and next to the screen to the right of me, I want this section of the arena, which I normally sit in when I'm at the game. And I want the crowd behind me. And to my left, I want to put my brother, because my brother's watching the game, and he and I want to watch it together. And then you sit down in your living room and you're surrounded with everything you need to feel like you're in the venue. I think that's where this is going, and without glasses, right? Just with images, because the cost of wallpapering your media room with video is coming down dramatically all the time. So I'm looking at synchronous experiences on laptops and on phones, whereby using the audio, your second screen syncs up automatically, right? So everything's in sync, everything's good, and you can just sit back and enjoy it. Because let's face it, you need that help, because when you're watching sports, you're not necessarily watching that closely, right? You're doing other things. That's the secret to sports and what we do. You're listening to the announcer's saying, well, and then all of a sudden you hear the announcer goes, well, the Golden State Warriors are on a 10-0 run here. But they could blow this one out, and then all of a sudden you get your attention. The announcer tells you to watch, you focus, and you go forward. So that's really what I'm thinking about. And then also that as a premium experience as well. Maybe premium, no commercial experience in the future. We're not licensed that way right now. But in other words, your option, if you want to pay for an NBA without commercials, you stay in the venue, right? You can watch the dancers. You can go to an analyst who's talking to you about the game, about what just happened. You can go to a breakdown of the plays. You can do whatever. So that's the immersive that I'm thinking about. It's an immersive without glasses.
Yeah, and we talked about video, but I mean, like for instance, one of the things when we were doing the big 54-foot wide walls and the double wides, doing 32:9 captures, those kinds of things, was the importance of audio, right? Getting the audio, and if you're talking about an immersive experience, if I want the fans behind me, you want that audio cue also. You're talking about integrating a lot of interesting kind of those kinds of media experiences together.
Oh God, yeah. In fact, the one of the things we're focused on greatly is audio, and we focused on the new Chase Center in Golden State and the new Milwaukee Bucks Pfizer Forum on making sure that the most important audio in the building is the audio from the fans, right? The fans' participation, their ability to focus their cheers down the field of play and be an effective sixth man, for the team. I mean, that was certainly the advantage. Toronto Raptors had that advantage. The Golden State Warriors have that advantage. The Dallas Mavericks have that advantage. Many, many teams have buildings that allow fans to do that.
Yeah, and it is interesting, right? I hadn't thought about it. And a lot of people probably don't realize this though, but I know you as part of your responsibilities, you get personally involved into the development and the design of these new stadiums. Everything from the fiber optic in the building to the camera placements to all of these elements, right? And a lot of people just think, oh, those are designed by independents, but you play that role to ensure that experience is great across all these new stadiums being built. So when we come back, we're gonna continue our conversation with Steve and continue this conversation looking into the NBA and some of the things that they've been able to bring out and put in place. And we've got some interesting stories yet to tell, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this quick, short commercial break. Welcome back. Hey, Steve, earlier in the show, we talked about that the NBA, you and your teams use the Summer League as kind of your sandbox. So give us a little bit of insight. What are some of those experiments you're running in the sandbox that you're most excited about?
Great. So the team came to me and said, Steve, we'd like to do some smartphone integration into the telecast. And I said, Well, we just signed this big partnership with AT&T. Why don't we do something with AT&T that's totally unique? We'll produce the entire game using 5G cell phones. So we, so we, so we decided to go down this route. We approached AT&T and said, "This is what we'd like to do. Never been done before." So AT&T jumped in with both feet. They provided the antennas, the Ericsson antennas, which they put up in the rafters of Thomas and Mack. They provided a live view to do the translation from 5G to HDSDI, so we could actually cut it in the truck. And they also provided a Samsung with a set of phones. We needed about 12 of them because the battery usage went fast when you're broadcasting in 5G. And we produced the entire game, all the audio, all the video, exclusively from the cell phones.
So what did you do? Did you mount the cell phones then, like at the same places you normally would put the courtside cameras?
So what we did was we actually had camera operators that were sitting about halfway between the foul line and the baseline, literally with their camera right over the patron's shoulder, because that was the shot that we wanted. It was kind of like a left 25 in football or a right 25 in football. We had one at each end doing that shot very close to the field of play, and then we had two cameras under the basket, doing the kind of traditional, below the basket camera, under the basket camera. And then we had a camera with our roving reporter and another camera with our talent. So the roving reporter was great because she would essentially do selfies to do interviews. She'd say, "Come on over here." And she'd hold up her phone and they do a selfie. They do a crosstalk interview. It was pretty amazing. I don't need to tell you the amount of R&D that goes into these cameras that are in these cell phones. They look awfully good. I mean, and the 5G made them look really good. And the game actually worked really well, from the perspective that so many of us live through the lens of a cell phone camera. That's how we describe our world, right? This is how you would describe your world if you were at courtside of an NBA game using cell phones. And the audio was surprisingly really good. The audio really worked now.
So how would you rate the output of this? Is it causing you to think differently then about integrating those kinds of mobile technologies into the normal game experience?
Absolutely, in the sense that I told the guys at the broadcasting meetings, I said, "Listen, devoting a camera and an audio operator and an IFB and everything that you need to do to put somebody on camera to be a courtside reporter, once 5G's in your building, you're just going to be able to pop them on the air with a selfie stick, right? So all of a sudden, the cost of picking up interviews in the venue or talking to the coach as he walks on or off the court, all this is going to be just de minimis in cost, once 5G is commercially installed inside your building. So I think that's one effect. The other effect is that certainly we will be using camera angles and video from fans at courtside. There is no doubt about it. Those fans at courtside have spectacular seats in the NBA. I mean, like the other sport, we have incredible, seating for our fans. We're going to be able to tap into what will be an army of people with really good cameras and really good locations at courtside. And I think it's definitely going to find its way into telecast. I mean, I don't know exactly how it's going to happen, Phil, but it's going to happen.
Well, think about it, right? I don't know how many times you see the shot, right, with, Spike Lee standing on, he's got his seats right on the courtside, right? So here you are with a partnership with the NBA. You can sign up for the Spike Lee version of the game, and he's actually managing the shots and the cuts and everything from the Spike Lee seat, right there at courtside. You can see some pretty crazy stuff happening.
Yeah. This company, LiveU, who I'm sure you know about, but they do transmission via LTE and Wi-Fi now, and now they've moved on to 5G. They actually provide an app that provides a return channel for IFB, so you can talk to the talent.
Yeah.
For pull back, and also we use the same channel to talk to the camera people. So that was already designed into the app, and then I don't need to tell you because you're aware of it completely. Wi-Fi 6 is coming,
Mm-hmm.
and the combination of Wi-Fi 6 and 5G is going to make those arenas just a giant. Everybody in the arena is going to be able to broadcast video.
Yeah. And for those of you listening who aren't familiar with Wi-Fi 6, it's basically, think of it as gigabit Wi-Fi. It really is the next generation with, more spectrum, wider channels, channel bonding, and it gets you reliable, consistent, high speed versus kind of the iffiness of, some of the older versions of Wi-Fi. And it is transformative because now your ability to carry extremely high quality video kind of is kind of, there's no question about it. You're going to have it. You're going to have it from the device, particularly in venues. In fact, some companies that I've been mentoring deployed some of the new Wi-Fi technologies into some of the stadiums already, and Madison Square Gardens being one that has some of the new Wi-Fi technologies in it. And it's absolutely amazing when you think about how many people want to snap a selfie of a Britney Spears concert, and everybody whips out their phone at the same time and all wants to send that photo simultaneously, and you got thousands of devices all of a sudden lighting up. So what are some other examples of some of the experiments you've been doing at Summer League?
So we experimented with some new robotic camera positions so that, again, like that left 25 and right 25, many of our arenas have vomitories for bunker suites that would allow me to put a camera in that could actually do really cool coverage at a very low angle, again, get people closer to the field of play. And they have these new setups for the camera people where they're like virtually, like they call it a pan bar setup, where the camera person can feather, can adjust the view, and can get a perfect kind of camera view, better than a joystick, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what we did with camera people is we actually put an 82-inch monitor in front of them that showed them the entire field of play, recognizing that when you're a camera person, you live kind of in and out of your lens. You've got one eye on your lens, the other eye are the broader scenes that you're ready for the director who will ask you to get a shot of the coach, get a shot of this person, zoom in on that person. So we kind of made the camera people feel comfortable enough to operate, remotely and still get great pictures. So that was another little innovation that we did. We had the Skycam. We had a kind of a interesting dueling homers, we called it, where we had two announcers, one for one team and one for the other team, going at each other the entire game while the teams were on the court. It was the Wizards versus the Spurs. The two of them were talking about their prospects, about how their team was better than their team. They got a better rookie draft. Just went back and forth the entire game. So it was a really cool alternate audio track that I actually really enjoyed. I thought it was good.
Well, I think the question you get to is people kind of think of sports, whether it be basketball, baseball, hockey, NASCAR racing, whatever, has been how much where does innovation go? And I think what you've proven out at Major League Baseball and at the NBA is that there's no end to this. There's always somebody coming up with something new and interesting that potentially can enhance the fan experience, and you got to be willing to try it and experiment with it. And some of it works, and some of it doesn't work. So when we come back, we're going to take another quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation with Steve, and in particularly, Steve, I'd be interested in getting your thoughts on what are you thinking about now? What are you curious about? Because I know you're always looking at what's next. So when we come back from this break, I'm going to put Steve in the hot seat and pick his brain here a little bit about what is he curious about trying coming up. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this quick commercial break. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the Biz Talk Radio Network. Welcome back to Killer Innovations. As we wrap up today's show, there's a question, Steve, that I wanted to ask. And every time I've been with you and we were working really closely years ago, and then when we do find an opportunity to periodically get together, is you're looking at a lot of stuff. Everybody comes to you and brings you some of the latest and coolest stuff and things you're constantly thinking about as far as, how do you transform and enhance and improve the NBA experience. So what is it that's got you going now? What are you curious about now?
I think I'm mostly curious about motion capture, and otherwise volumetric video capture. So we've been doing, as you know, we've been doing player tracking. Actually, it's now 8 years, and we're essentially just tracking the players on the floor in the XY zone. I call them blobs. They move around on the court. We also capture the ball XYZ, as I related to earlier when talking about Skycam. But what we really, and that's revolutionized the game because it's led to a faster, better, more paced game, because what it did, it showed the analytics guys without a doubt that the 3-point shot, an open catch and shoot 3-point shot, is the most valuable shot on the court. Your feet are set, you've had a glimpse at the ball, you shoot, right? And then other than that, the next most valuable shot is something at the rim, right? Where you're uncontested or you have a very good chance of getting a rebound. Everything else in the middle is not necessarily as valuable, and it's really changed the game and led to a much faster paced, more open NBA game. So thank God the technology led us in this direction. We're lucky, not smart. The next thing would be volumetric, in the sense that the pace of play today in the NBA, which is fast and furious and completely unrelated to what even happened 5 years ago, much less 10 years ago. So, for instance, in tennis, I always say to people, you go back and watch, Bjorn Borg and Jimmy Connors play, they look like they're in slow motion and underwater, and you swear you could grab your racket and go out and beat them. Of course, you could never do so. Versus today, and the players today and the way they're playing. So same with our sports. So, but now with this faster pace, we need to really attend to the players and look at load management. We need to look at what's going on with their bodies. We need to pay careful attention to them. And a 3D, a motion capture system would allow the orthopedics to look very, very carefully, and the trainers and the physical therapists at players, to understand exactly what they're going through, to actually isolate the 10 big events where they jumped 4 feet in the air and landed on 1 foot, or to notice incremental differences in their gait or in how fast they break for the ball, so they can get them on the table and ask them and say, hey, it's funny, but you're breaking for the ball 1/10 of a second slower than you did last week. And then invariably I'm sure what would happen is the athlete would go, well, gee, I had a little something going on my hip, but I didn't really want to tell you about it because I'm fixing it myself. And that gives the therapist the opportunity to say, fix it. Because essentially what we're discovering, and it's the same in all sports, is that in that dynamic from your toes to your foot, to your ankle, to your knee, to your hip, right? When you come down on that from 4 feet in the air, if there's any fault in any of those structures and joints, it will be expressed in the form of an injury, right? And obviously, it's in our great interest to keep all of our players up and running and at full steam, because people want to enjoy the stars and the very best players in the game. They don't. Not that the second string in the NBA isn't great. The second string in the NBA is just a step below the first string, but that's something that load management we're very focused on, particularly. Also, obviously, it was highlighted in the finals this year, where Klay Thompson had an injury, right? That led to a different injury, right? And the same with Durant. So that we're very focused on this. So I think that's I'm very focused on systems for volumetric capture, for video, and then also motion capture for players that I can turn into data that our doctors and our physical therapists can use.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think it's another example, I think, of technologies that maybe get a foothold in sports, but can be applied to all of our everyday lives, right? As you and I were laughing before we started the show today about, as you get older, boy, you do slow down, and things hurt a little bit more, and when you do get an injury, I figured out. Everybody asks if I ski since I live in Colorado, right? And I've said no, I don't ski, because I have figured out that the recovery time from an injury grows exponentially with age, and I'm not interested in being out of the game for 6 months or a year trying to recover from some crazy injury. So, Steve, if people want to keep track of what's going on, with the NBA and with the technologies that you're developing, is there someplace they can check out what you're doing?
I would say a lot of the experimentations that we're doing around broadcast will be on NBA TV this year, and will also be included inside of NBA League Pass. So I think those are probably the two best places to kind of observe what we're doing, because particularly a lot of the player tracking information will be expressed from Second Spectrum into the telecast and will be offered as alternate feeds inside of the app, so that you can choose to watch a game with AR markings, or choose to watch the straight game, or you can choose to go back and use the AR markings to look at a play that particularly interested you or that the announcers are talking about. So I would say those are the places to observe the NBA.
Perfect. And we'll put links for all of that in the show notes. So you want to hop over to killerinnovations.com. We'll have the show notes with those links so that you can find it and check out Steve and his the Innovation Sandbox and what they're experimenting with at the NBA. Steve, I want to just thank you for taking the time out of your schedule. I know you're crazy busy, and appreciate you joining us here on the show today.
Thanks, Phil. I'm looking forward to, I think, what will be a very interesting NBA season, with particularly with all the new dynamic duos that are out there on the field of play. It's going to be fun.
Good. It'll be a great year. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Phil.